you to our first ever Kids Free Grief Summit. A few announcements before we get started. Q&A will be turned on a half an hour after we start. So look for any messages in your chat that the PESI staff may send to you. We will have chat opened a few times during the day for interaction. We will also be having a drawing activity after our first break today. You'll have a lot of time, don't worry, to go grab paper and markers or pens, whatever you have during the break time. And if you don't have any, no worries. We'll be taking the first Q&A after lunch today. So please feel free to upvote any of the questions that you have that you see in the Q&A. And then feel free to check out the FAQ tab in your portal for any other questions you may have. It's now my pleasure to introduce Liana Lowenstein. Liana is a social worker and play therapist in Toronto with over 35 years of practice with children and their families. She is internationally recognized for her innovative trainings and books, and Liana's 14th book just launched last week, Corey Helps Kids Cope with Grief. Liana is the winner of the Monica Herbert Award for Outstanding Contribution to Play Therapy in Canada. Welcome, Liana.
Thank you so much, Meg, and good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited for this first ever Kids Grief Summit and so honored to be a part of it. And our speakers tomorrow are awesome, so it's going to be a great 2-day training. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So this is going to be a somewhat interactive day. I always try to make my trainings experiential. It's a little bit of a challenge. We're such a huge group, but I hope that you will join along in some of the experiential activities. I want to begin by saying that my clients have been my greatest source of inspiration and have taught me so much. And I'll be showing several actual client videos today and talking about some of the clients that I have had the honor of working with. And so today, you're also going to be inspired by some of my clients and you'll learn from them. So you will learn from Cadence and her mom, who will teach you how to explain homicide to a young child. Michael and Kalia will teach you how to differentiate between typical and traumatic grief. Kalia, Kamora, and their mom will teach you how to conduct an art-based family assessment. Ariana and Lucy will teach you how to use play to help children tell their story and process their grief. Matthew will teach you how to process feelings of guilt and abandonment related to his mother's suicide. Hannah will teach you how to use creative activities in a child's final session. And you'll also learn from my own personal story. This is a picture of me when I was 10, so many years ago. My mother died by suicide when I was 10, and I'll be sharing some of my story as well today. I do want to say that many of the videos that I'll be showing you and some of the client situations that I'll be sharing with you today are difficult to hear. And so I want to just encourage you to take care of yourself. So if during this day you are starting to feel really triggered or having a hard time hearing some of this information, please do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself. If you need to turn off the sound or leave for a period of time, do whatever you need to do to help yourself through these tougher moments today. So let's begin. So let's talk about grief. So grief is a normal emotional response to loss. It involves all aspects of the human experience, including social, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and spiritual dimensions. So this is, so Kalia and Kimura, so Kalia, 8 years old, Kimura, 6 years old. Their father was shot and killed while playing basketball at the court right beside their apartment building. And so I asked each of them I provided them with some finger paints, because I think finger paints are such a wonderful way to help children express. And so I provide, and this was each in their own individual session. I asked them to create a picture using the finger paints that showed me how they feel about their father's death. So Kalia, who's 8, her picture is the one on the left. And she said the following about her picture. I love the summer. So remember, the directive was create a picture that shows how you feel about her father's death. So she immediately went to something kind of positive. I love the summer and I'm happy because I get to go swimming. Sometimes I'm sad because my dad died. And then she pointed to the little blue dot that's inside the sun. And she said, that's just a little bit to show I'm a little bit sad. And then she said, my dad's in heaven because he got killed. His stomach exploded from the bullet. This is the gun that killed him. And you could see sort of this, her gun that she's drawn beside the figure on top of the clouds. This is the gun that killed him. And these people are running from the bullets so they don't get killed. So the clouds are actually people. And I thought the black dots underneath the clouds were raindrops, but they're actually bullets. So compare that to her sister, Kimura, who is 6 years old. And as you can see, she's used a lot of the red and the black finger paint. And she said, I feel bad and sad. And then the figurine beside the splotches, she said, here's the bad guy, he shooted my daddy. So as you reflect on these two experiences of grief, these two young children, let's do our first chat. Let's do our first experiential activity, and let's use the chat box to type into the chat box, what are the key differences? What are the similarities and what are the differences in these two children's grief experiences? So what are the similarities? What are the differences in their responses to grief? And I'm just going to read some of the things that I see popping up. Colors are different. Similarities of sadness. One seems more aggressive. One is more sad, focused on sad and mad. The other one has a focus on happiness. They're both talking about the bad guy, so there's sort of fear in both. Size of the people are different. Both using black in color. Both able to express their feelings. One is focused more on angry, scared. The other has sort of happiness. So I think one of the things I really want to emphasize when we're working with bereaved children is that children's experiences and responses to grief can be very different. And so you can have two children, like in this case, both from the same family, both experiencing the same incident or experience, their father shot and killed, but their responses, their reactions can be very different. And so it's really important when we're working with and supporting bereaved children, grieving children, that we really try to understand what are their unique perceptions, and experiences. How is the death impacting them? Bereavement is a life event involving the loss of a significant person through death. Mourning is taking the internal experience of grief and expressing it. It's the cultural expression of grief as seen in the traditional or grief rituals. And when we're working with children, when we're working with families, of course, we want to honor and be respectful of the mourning rituals that families are meaningful to them. But one of the things that's really important, I think, when I'm talking with caregivers, is emphasizing the importance that they try to explain their cultural expressions of grief or their rituals to the children, because often families are engaging and participating in these mourning rituals and not explaining what they are and their meaning to children. So I'll share an experience from my own story. So as I said before, my mother died when I was 10, and I'm Jewish. And in the Jewish culture, a Shiva is held for family and friends to begin the healing process. It's a 7-day period of mourning, or can be up to a 7-day period. And one of the rituals during the Shiva is that mirrors in the home may be covered. And this is a Jewish custom because during the mourning period, the family is not to concern themselves with their own reflection. And so there's no need for mirrors. So I remember at my mother's Shiva, no one had explained to me this ritual or really any of the rituals or even really what a Shiva was. And I remember, seeing the blanket covering the mirror and going to take it off. And then I remember getting yelled at for trying to take the blanket off the mirror. And that was, of course, because no one had explained to me, why the mirror was covered with a blanket. So I think it just shows the importance of involving children in mourning rituals, explaining the mourning rituals, preparing them for these mourning rituals. Cultural competence. This can be a whole long day training in and of itself. So I want to just very briefly mention that cultural competence is the capacity to engage respectfully and positively with individuals from diverse backgrounds and contexts. When applied to grief counseling, it requires practitioners to be aware of and attuned to individual differences and associated needs. I live in Toronto, and we are the most culturally diverse city on the planet. We were written up in National Geographic many years ago, writing about our cultural diversity. And so in my clinical practice, I have families coming to see me from many different cultural backgrounds. And so I like to invite them to teach me about their culture, their beliefs, their rituals. And then, of course, I integrate that into the activities. So not only do you want to invite the families that you're working with to teach you about their culture, but you then want to make sure that you are sensitive to their beliefs, their customs, and integrate that into the any activities that you are using. Families will have specific beliefs about death and will practice certain mourning rituals based on their religion, spiritual, and cultural beliefs. Honor these beliefs and be accepting of diversity. Grief supporters must be mindful and respectful of the cultural narratives, practices, and responses around death, caring, and health. This includes holding in mind how our own biases, assumptions, beliefs, and attitudes can color these, judge these, and over-identify with them. And this is a quote from Karen Treisman, who specializes in working with traumatized children. And I love all of her resources and respect her her work. My Pinterest page has lots of different boards on different topics, including grief. And I have uploaded onto the grief board lots of resources, activities, links to articles, including several of my favorites on grief within a cultural context. So check out my Pinterest board for further information. Disenfranchised grief is when a person is denied their right to feel loss. It refers to grief that's not openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned, often leading to feelings of isolation and confusion. This can lead to individuals experiencing intensified and prolonged periods of grief due to a lack of resolution for their emotions. So let me give you an example. So actually, before I give you an example, so I love this quote from Niemeyer and Jordan. So the essential issue in disenfranchised grief is empathic failure, which is defined as the failure of one part of the system to understand the meaning and experience of another. I love this quote because I think that's really what it's all about. It's about lacking empathy for the experience of loss that somebody else is going through. So, case example I want to share with you, a 14-year-old client whose father struggled for years with alcohol use disorder. She witnessed multiple incidents of her father getting drunk and physically abusing her mom. He was never physically abusive directly towards her, but she certainly witnessed a lot of violence in the home. On her 14th birthday, her father was driving while intoxicated. He crashed into a bus stop and seriously injured a mom and her baby. He then continued to drive on. He hit a light post and he died in the crash. She was referred to me to address self-harm. Notice she was not referred to me for grief therapy, for grief counseling. So the main presenting issue when her mom called was that she was concerned about self-harm. So I thought it was interesting right off the bat that the main referral reason wasn't related to her father's death. So in our first session, I asked her to create a sand tray. I use a lot of sand tray in my clinical practice. So I asked her to create a sand tray to show me how she was feeling. So this is what she created, and then this is what she said about it. So everyone hates my dad because of what he did. They think he should rot in hell. But he's my dad and I love him. He won't be here for my birthday, for Christmas, when I get married. My heart is broken, but nobody cares. I pretend to be happy, but I cry in my bed so nobody sees me. So I think this is such, it's painful to hear her experience, but also really, I think, accentuates disenfranchised grief and how really nobody is acknowledging her pain. Okay, so when I first begin to work with grieving children, and really most kids who come to see me, right off the bat in the first session, I like to teach them coping strategies. So I don't wait until I've completed an assessment and we're in the treatment phase to introduce coping strategies. Right off the bat in the first session, I like to teach them coping strategies. And one technique that I use is called a feel better bag. So the child gets a gift bag, and I like these white ones because then kids can decorate the outside of the bag. So they get a feel better bag in the first session. And throughout our work together, our time together, I teach them different coping strategies. And then there's some kind of a prop that goes into their Feel Better bag. They take their bag home with them at the end of the first session, and I encourage them to keep it by their bed. And so each session, they might learn a new coping strategy, and they take the prop home and they add it to their Feel Better bag. And that way they have a visual prompt, a visual reminder, a bag filled with coping tools that they can use in times of need. So I'm going to invite Meg to come on camera. And Meg, I'm going to teach you the first coping strategy. And I'm going to, even though we can't see all of you because your cameras have to be turned off today, I would like to encourage all of you to follow along. So as Meg and I are engaging in these experiential activities, I would like to encourage you as well to participate along with us. So this first coping strategy, Meg, for your Feel Better bag, and Meg has her little bag. I asked her to come today prepared with a bag so she could
Here's my bag, not white though, but
it's not white. That's okay. That's okay, Meg. Okay, so this first coping strategy I call Happy Meal. So if I were to do this with a client, I'd be asking the caregiver probably ahead of time, what are your child's, some of their favorite, foods. So Meg, here I have a couple of items. Mm-hmm. So I would like, and they're all things that are meant to be, eaten hot. Okay, so that's kind of one of the things for this particular activity. So these are hot items of food. Which of these would be like a favorite of yours? So which pizza, mac and cheese?
Hands down, mac and cheese.
Okay, mac and cheese. I love it too. Okay. Mac and cheese is such a wonderful, delicious, smell. So when you think about mac and cheese, you think about how it smells. What can you describe the smell to me? It smells delicious.
Yeah, rich and cheesy. Yummy. I just remember my mom's homemade. It was delicious and gave me
had a really yummy cheddar smell. Yes. Okay, so we're going to so let's stand up and we're going to learn stop, freeze, breathe. So this first technique for your Feel Better bag is called stop, freeze, breathe. So I want you to kind of picture a stop sign in your head and just kind of try to help your body become still and sort of stop your body. And then I want you to kind of freeze your body. And I want you to breathe in. And as you're breathing in, you can take some slow, deep breaths in and out. So let's, maybe put our hand on our tummy and our other hand on our chest and take some slow, deep breaths. And as you're taking some slow, deep breaths, try to keep your chest and shoulders still and only feel your tummy moving in and out. So like this. Good. Now, when you breathe in, I want you to try to keep your mouth closed and breathe in through your nose like this. And when you breathe out, you can open your mouth and breathe out like this. When you breathe in, you're going to breathe in for 4 seconds and out for 4 seconds. So I encourage everyone to stand up and just do this with us. So stand up, take some slow, deep breaths in and out. Now, Meg, imagine that a fresh batch of yummy, delicious mac and cheese has come hot out of the oven. Your mom's delicious mac and cheese. I can already see the smile on your face as you imagine this. That's why this is called Happy Meal. And I want you to breathe in for 4 seconds and breathe in the yummy, delicious smell of that mac and cheese. But it's really hot, so you got to blow on it to cool it down. Smell the mac and cheese. And blow on it to cool it down. So that is a way to teach young children how to do deep breathing. Because typically, you can open your eyes now, Meg. Typically, when we're trying to teach kids deep breathing, this is what it looks like. And all their breath gets stuck in their chest, and that's not relaxed breathing at all. Not very effective. In fact, it doesn't even feel good. So we want to help kids breathe in through their nose, out through their mouth. And Happy Meal by having them imagine smelling something really yummy, delicious, whether it's pizza or mac and cheese or yummy delicious noodle soup or wings, whatever that is. Okay, so Meg, now I'd like you to just quickly draw a picture of your mom's mac and cheese. So take like literally 30 seconds to just quickly draw a picture of your mom's mac and cheese. Now, normally with a client, I would give much more time for them to create their picture. And so while Meg is doing that, so you're going to draw a picture of your mom's mac and cheese, and then you're going to fold your picture and you're going to add it to your feel better bag. So you have your first item for your feel better bag. And then I would say to the child, so when you're feeling kind of stressed, maybe really anxious or scared, I want you to take out your picture of the mac and cheese or whatever it is for you from your feel better bag. And that will remind you to do stop, freeze, breathe.
Put it in my feel better bag.
Put it in your feel better bag. So now you have your first item, your first coping strategy. Great. Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Meg.
Bet.
Okay, so let's talk about dual process of grief. So children cope with the death by alternating between confronting and avoiding their grief. They deal with the death directly through loss-oriented activities like crying or talking about the deceased, and also engage in restoration-oriented activities, which involve adjusting to life without the person who died, like returning to school or playing with friends. This model acknowledges that children's grieving is not linear, but rather a fluctuating one with attention shifting between the emotional and practical implications of their loss. And so with children especially, so children's expression of grief, such as sadness and anger, are exhibited in a sporadic manner where normative activities such as play are interrupted by instances of intensely expressed grief. So what this looks like in kids is that one moment the child might be, showing intense sadness, perhaps crying, but not all. Some kids don't show sadness through tears, or having an anger outburst, perhaps. And then the next minute they're laughing and they're playing. And so this is a concept that we really need to explain to caregivers, teachers, because caregivers often misinterpret this. They think, oh, my child's fine. My child's not grieving because look, they're laughing, they're playing, they're fine. So it's really important for us to provide caregivers, especially parents and teachers, other primary caregivers, with psychoeducation about how kids express their grief. Regrief is another important concept. So as children grow and their cognitive and emotional understanding deepens, they may re-experience feelings of grief over loss that occurred earlier in their lives. This can happen at different developmental stages or significant life events, like starting school, reaching adolescence, and each time they re-encounter the grief, they may process it in a new way that is in line with their current level of development and understanding. This concept highlights the non-linear and ongoing nature of grieving in children, acknowledging that their grieving process may be revisited and expressed differently as they mature. So this is another really important concept that we explain to caregivers, because let's say you are supporting a family where the child's person died when they were much younger, and now all of a sudden they're starting to really struggle. Caregivers may not reconnect that to their earlier experience of loss. I'll share another example from my own life. At the age of 10, really I would say, first of all, in shock and masking and avoiding my grief. And I remember at the age of about I'm pretty sure I was about 14, and listening to the Beatles song, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I remember just like bursting into tears because it reminded me of the fact that I couldn't hold my mother's hand. And I remember just sobbing, and then for days, just really sort of experiencing these intense feelings of sadness and missing my mother. And these were feelings that I really hadn't felt or expressed when I was 10. And so this concept of regrief is really important, and especially for young kids who might not fully experience the intense emotions, it often comes out later and at future stages of development. Okay, I'm going to skip over some of these slides. The slides in your handouts that I am skipping over doesn't mean that they're not important, but you can read some of this stuff on your own. So I encourage you to read through the slides that I'm not actually talking about today. So please go back and read through the slides that I'm skipping over. So there are a lot of different factors that affect the grieving process. And how children grieve and how the death might impact them. So I'm going to skip over this because you can read this on your own. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about grief-informed practice and just acknowledge the very important work of Donna Sherman, Monique Mitchell from the Dougy Center. I was fortunate enough to meet Donna many years ago at the ADEC conference, the conference on the Association for Death Education and Counseling conference. And she's one of the pioneers in our field of working with kids in grief, supporting kids in grief. So grief-informed practice so grief-informed approaches recognize the inevitability, there we go, of loss, and the individuality of each loss relative to the relationship and circumstances surrounding it. By acknowledging that grief is both individual and interwoven into a socio-cultural context, a grief-informed response states, grief is complex. You are having a normal response to a complex situation. So really important for us to understand that grief, all grief, is a normal response to a complex situation. And I love this. This is 10 core principles and tenets of grief-informed practice. Again, I'm not going to go through this. You can read this on your own. And I want to just link you to this wonderful position paper called Becoming Grief-Informed, a Call to Action. So you can Google this. You can find this, I believe, on the Dougy Center's website. And I strongly encourage you to take a look at this. So Becoming Grief-Informed, a Call to Action. Prolonged grief disorder. So there's a lot of controversy in the field about this. And I'm going to speak a little bit about this controversy. So prolonged grief disorder in children involves an extended period of intense longing for the deceased or with the circumstances around the death. These children have difficulty adjusting to the loss, which leads to impaired functioning in various aspects or areas of their life. So in 2022, prolonged grief disorder was included in the two main classification systems for mental disorders, the DSM-5-TR and the ICD-11. I'm not going to read through this slide. You can read this on your own, but these are the diagnostic criteria of PGD. So in children, persistent yearning for the deceased and is often expressed through play and behavior rather than words, because kids express their feelings, their thoughts and feelings through their play and through their behavior. Intense sorrow and emotional pain in response to the death, and a preoccupation with the deceased and or the circumstances or the way the person died. So prolonged grief, there's a lot of, I guess, lively discourse in the field about the term prolonged grief disorder, about its inclusion, about calling it a mental health disorder. So I want to just briefly talk about sort of the pros and cons. And I don't take a position, I'm not going to speak to a position either way. I'm just going to provide you with some information. So the pros, some of the pros of prolonged grief disorder: it can lead to improved identification and specialized care, potentially preventing further complications. Provides mental health professionals with guidance on how to assess and treat individuals who meet the criteria. Provides a common language about grief. Validates the ongoing pain of grievers and helps them understand what they're going through. allows prolonged grief to become more acceptable and integrated into society, facilitates better access to bereavement care and allocation of resources, because if this could be, in the DSM, then they may get access to funding for services, and then therefore covered by the insurers. On the other hand, the cons, it pathologizes normal grief experiences. There's an absence of consensus among researchers and clinicians regarding the diagnostic criteria. It fails to account for ways grief manifests amongst diverse groups, especially racially non-white. It stigmatizes and shames those who grieve, discounts the lifelong impact of grief. Grievers who have suppressed their grief may be reluctant to revisit their grief in later years. It can lead to misdiagnosis, overdiagnosis, and oversubscribing of medication. And the post-death timeframe for diagnostic consideration are social constructs that cannot be scientifically validated. And this is something that I read. I believe it was in an article written by Donna Sherman. So there are two sides to this debate. Again, I'm not taking a side either way, just presenting you with the information. But when we're talking about children, some important factors to consider. First of all, the diagnostic criteria does not apply to young children. It's a new area of study, and especially among children where, we continue to really learn so much about children and grief. And so this is all very new. It's challenging to assess PGD in youth. And although there have been some standardized measures recently developed, these still are all very new. The grieving process in children is non-linear and marked by periods of regression. So I've already talked about this and talked about how some children may mask their grief or avoid their grief. It might go underground and then only kind of surface years later. And that does not mean that this is a child who's suffering from prolonged grief disorder. So it's very normal for children for regrief to happen and for kids to grieve in spurts. So, as I said, grief resurfaces months, years after the death as children's cognitive capacity shifts as they reach different developmental milestones. I'm not going to share this, go over this slide, but this, I think, speaks to a balanced perspective. And I think it's important that we really acknowledge both perspectives and really try to understand that we can find balance here. And I really like this quote. So, if we were a more grief literate society and knew how to support the bereaved, the small number who are diagnosed with PGD might not end up in that situation. People would be more familiar with what grief is. We would feel comfortable being there for people who've been bereaved and sharing as much as we want to about how we're feeling in our grief. It always surprises me how people really struggle with the very simple thing of saying, "I'm so sorry that happened to you." The inclusion in the DSM of a disorder that will only apply to a minority of people is not the answer to the bigger problem that our society is not good at grief. Another important quote. So rather than focusing on grief as a diagnosis, so rather than us getting really caught up on a diagnosis, let's pay attention to signs that the child might be struggling to cope with the death. Like, are there significant changes in the child's behavior, ongoing emotional distress, sleep disturbance, regression in developmental milestones, refusal to accept the death? If this persists over an extended period and significantly impacts the child's well-being and daily functioning, and that's key here, we want to not just understand the child's behavioral struggles, but to what extent are these behavioral struggles impacting the child's well-being and daily functioning? Then an appropriate support plan should be put in place. So keep in mind that longer grief responses especially when we're talking about children, can be indicative of many factors. So it could be related to the death, but it can also be related to other struggles, other family challenges, like insecure attachment, violence in the home, poverty. So if a child is struggling behaviorally, sleep disturbance, regression, it may not be specifically directly related to their grief, or it could be grief, but it could be also other things and or other things going on in their life. Okay, Meg, come back on. Let's now do something else for the feel better bag. So Meg, let's stand up. So this next coping strategy is called Wild Monkeys Can Be Calm. And Meg, this is one that's geared to more like younger kids. And I'm going to invite everybody. So all of you out there, wherever you happen to be, please join us, stand up and follow along. So let your silly side come out here, Meg, because this is kind of something to do with younger kids. And when we're working with younger kids, we kind of have to be playful and sometimes a little bit silly. So this is called Wild Monkeys Can Be Calm. So we're going to hold up our fingers and we're going to pretend our fingers are wild monkeys. Okay, so let's kind of make our fingers go like really wild like this and really wild. Just kind of let them be really wild and then stop. Guess what, Meg? I have a strategy and it's going to help calm the monkeys down. Watch me and copy me. So I'm going to put my thumb to my first finger and say I. So copy me. I.
Right.
Thumb to your next finger. Can.
Can.
Next finger. B.
Be.
Last finger, your pinky. Calm.
Calm.
So it's I can be calm. Okay, so wild monkeys, ooh, ah, and let's get calm. Do it with me. I can be calm. Deep breath. Good. Now you can do it real subtly. I'm going to just turn the camera to my fingers. So you don't have to like stand up in front of everybody and do this. You can do it real subtly. Just kind of like wiggle your fingers, just kind of let the tension go out and through your fingers by wiggling them. And then just very subtly, I can be calm. And breath. Okay. And then Meg, what do you think you want to draw? What picture would you like to draw for your Feel Better bag? What would be a visual prompt that reminds you about this technique? What could you draw?
What could I draw? My hands.
Okay, you could draw your hands. There you go. So you can turn your camera off for now. If this was an actual client session, I would give the client some time to draw whatever whether it's a monkey or their hands or whatever visual prompt will remind them to use this strategy when they need to self-calm. Now, of course, for all these strategies, we're not only teaching this to the child, we're teaching it to the child and their caregivers, and we're encouraging child and caregivers to learn, practice, and implement these coping strategies when they need to. And so when I teach a new technique, a new strategy to the client, and they take it home and they put it in their Feel Better bag, which hopefully they're keeping beside their bed, we're then strongly encouraging the caregiver to practice these strategies at bedtime, because it's a great way to then self-calm at bedtime in preparation for sleep. Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Meg. Child traumatic grief. So child traumatic grief is when children perceive the death as terrifying, whether the death was sudden and unexpected or due to natural causes, and develop death-related trauma responses. Trauma responses interfere with a child's grieving process because they're stuck on the traumatic or horrifying aspects of the death and are unable to endure the thoughts, feelings, and memories necessary for mourning. I'm going to skip ahead here. So a child can develop traumatic grief, whether it's sudden, unexpected, accidental, violent, gory, or unbearably agonizing. So it's really the child's perception. It's not the way the person died per se, but it's the perception that as it's the child perceiving it as a terrifying experience. So I'm going to just skip ahead again here. So a child does not have to have been present or to have witnessed what happened to develop traumatic grief. Whether a child was told what happened, saw what happened, or only imagines what happened, scary and disturbing thoughts and images of how a person suffered or died may keep coming up in the child's mind. Any thoughts of the person who died, even happy ones, can lead to upsetting images or memories of the way that person died. These images are so upsetting that the child avoids thinking or talking about the person, and thus the loss itself cannot be fully experienced and the pain of the grief cannot recede. And this comes out of the work of Cohen, Manarino, and Deblinger, and some of their important work in the field. So typical grief versus traumatic grief. So the bereaved yearn and are preoccupied with their loss. The traumatized are anxious and preoccupied with their trauma. Bereaved people are anxious about the separation from their lost one. Anxiety settles, but sadness is deep and persistent. The traumatized are not sad or nostalgic, even when they're also bereaved, but are specifically anxious about threats of danger, similar to that which they have experienced. So let me give you some examples to help you better understand this concept of traumatic grief. So this is a 4-year-old boy who I worked with many years ago. His father died from a brain tumor. And his older brother is an Orthodox Jewish family, and his older brother left for Israel to go to university there. And so this is his sand tray, and this is unprompted from me. So I do both directive and non-directive, or use directive and non-directive approaches in my clinical practice. And so here, this boy has gone to the sand tray, and unprompted from me, he has lined up all these people. So I didn't give him any kind of directive. He's spontaneously gone to the sand tray and he's lined up all these people. And this session was about 2 weeks after his father's death. So he's lined up all these people. And then he takes a coffin and he puts 2 adult male figurines in the coffin, and he says the following: they're dead, they're going in the ground. The people are watching them go in the ground. And then in a sad tone, he says, I don't play with them anymore. So clearly he is illustrating through the sand tray feelings of sadness, yearning, loss, missing both his father as well as his older brother. So compare this to Kalia. Again, her father was shot while playing basketball, shot and killed while playing basketball on the court beside their apartment building. And this is her sand tray. And again, unprompted, this is her spontaneous sand tray. And she's created this scene. So she says, she chooses an adult male figurine and then sort of lays him down, and then chooses a figurine of a man holding a gun. And she says, this guy shoot at this guy, and this guy fall down. And these guys are scared to get shoot too, and they're screaming and running to run away. And the ambulance takes this guy to the doctor. She then puts the man who got shot on top of the ambulance. And then she says in a scared tone, and he got dead. So key differences. In the first one, Michael's, I think sort of his response is, his primary emotions are loss and sadness and yearning. And in Kalia's, I would say that the main grief response is fear and danger. And so I think this illustrates typical grief versus traumatic grief. And in traumatic grief, fear, danger is the main emotional response. So it's important to note that whether something is traumatic or not is dependent on the perception of the person experiencing the event. So one family member might watch a person die and not be traumatized by it, whereas another family member witnesses the same death and experiences symptoms of trauma. So I'm going to show a video now, and this is a story called Ready to Remember, Jeremy's Journey of Hope and Healing. As you're watching the video, and this is put out by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. As you're watching the video, I'd like you to make note of how Jeremy's sort of perception and experience of his father's death versus his brother Brandon, and then we're going to do a poll afterwards. So here we go.
Ready to Remember, Jeremy's Journey of Hope and Healing. Jeremy loved art. It had always been his favorite subject in school. But lately, the 10-year-old boy couldn't even pick up a paintbrush. Today in art class, he just stared at his blank paper. "Do you need some ideas for your sketch?" Mr. Davis asked. "Nah, I just don't feel like drawing," Jeremy replied. The boy's artwork used to cover the walls of the classroom. Now Jeremy just didn't seem interested. "I'd rather read my book," he told Mr. Davis. After school, Jeremy's mother picked up Jeremy and his younger brother. Brandon jumped into the back seat. Jeremy's brother was in second grade. He turned 8 3 months ago, just a few weeks before that horrible day. "Woohoo! It's the weekend," yelled Brandon. "Fridays rule." "It's finally warming up," said their mother. "Do you boys want to go to the skate park tomorrow?" "Yes," said Brandon. "I can't," Jeremy said, looking out the window. "I need to study." "But it's the weekend. You can take some time out for a little fun, can't you, honey?" asked Jeremy's mom. "No," Jeremy snapped. "I have a math test coming up. Don't you remember that I got a C- on the last one?" Jeremy's grades were way down. Until recently, he always got straight A's in school. "That's okay, Jeremy," said Brandon. "We can skateboard another time." When they got home, Jeremy went straight to his room. His brother followed him. "Hey, Jer, do you want to play a video game or something?" Brandon asked. Maybe," said Jeremy. Brandon was excited. "Cool. Let's play the one Dad gave me for my birthday. Let's go downstairs." "Hold on," Jeremy said, changing his mind. "I'm not in the mood. I really want to finish my book." Brandon looked at his big brother. He loved hanging out with Jeremy, but lately he felt like a big pest. Jeremy always wanted to be alone. His friends didn't even come over anymore. At dinner that night, the boy's mom served homemade pizza. "Can I have another piece, Mom?" Brandon asked, popping a piece of pepperoni into his mouth. "Do you guys remember that time last year when Dad was making one of his super duper pizzas? He threw the pizza dough in the air like real pizza chefs do, but it landed on the toaster." Brandon laughed at the memory, and he just scraped it off and used it. Gross. Their mom laughed along with Brandon. Jeremy jumped up from the table, knocking his glass of juice onto the floor. "Why do you two keep talking about Dad?" he yelled. "Haven't you noticed? He's not here anymore. Who cares about some stupid pizza he made?" Jeremy didn't want to hear stories about his dad. He missed him too much. Why couldn't his mother and brother understand that? "Jeremy," his mother called out. "I'm not hungry. I'm going upstairs to read," Jeremy said as he dashed to his room and slammed the door behind him. Jeremy tried to read his book, but the words just blurred together. How can they talk about Dad as if nothing happened, he wondered. Don't they even care that he's gone? Whenever someone mentioned his father, even a happy memory, all Jeremy could think about was the awful way that he died. Now every time Brandon or his mom brought up a story about his dad, Jeremy just felt scared. He had so many awful dreams about his father's death that he was afraid to go to sleep. When Jeremy was 7, his father gave him his first set of colored pencils. There were 64 pencils in the set, more colors than he had ever seen. He and his dad loved to draw pictures together. They used to make funny portraits of each other. His dad also taught Jeremy and Brandon how to skateboard. He may have been the oldest person at the skate park, but he could do an ollie jump and kickflip better than most of the kids. Whenever Jeremy saw the colored pencils or his skateboard, they reminded him of his father and the terrible way that he died. His stomach started hurting and he often felt like throwing up. Jeremy thought it was his fault that his dad died. He should have known something bad was going to happen and warned his father. It was easier to just stay away from anything that reminded him of his dad. Jeremy's mom came upstairs to talk to him. She sat on the edge of his bed. "I know how much you miss Dad, sweetie," his mom said. "We all do." "I should have stopped him from going out that day," Jeremy said, still staring at the pages of his book. "Oh, honey, there's nothing you or any of us could have done. Sometimes bad things just happen. You had nothing to do with it." "I don't feel so good, Mom," Jeremy said, shutting his eyes. When he thought about his dad, his heart would beat so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. And now he was worried all the time about his mom, too. Would something happen to her? "I have that stomach ache again," Jeremy said, grabbing his belly. "Oh, son, I'm worried that it's not going away. I think we need to go see Dr. Chung again. Maybe she can figure out how to make it better." The next day, Jeremy's mother took him to the doctor's office. Dr. Chung examined Jeremy and talked to him for a long time. She said that she wanted to send him to a friend of hers who was a different kind of expert, a counselor who helped people with their feelings. "Jeremy, would you be willing to talk to my friend? I think she'll be able to help you with your stomach ache." "I guess so," Jeremy said. He was worried that the counselor would make him talk about his dad, and he did not want to do that. A few days later, Jeremy and his mother got to his appointment early. A girl and her dad were leaving as Jeremy walked into the waiting room. When Jeremy looked up, he was surprised to see it was someone he knew. Elena was a grade above him and one of the star soccer players at his school. He remembered that she made the winning goal at the finals last year. The girl saw him and waved. "You're Jeremy, right?" the girl said. "I'm Elena." Jeremy just looked down at his feet. He didn't feel like talking to Elena right now. He was thinking about going in to see the counselor. Jeremy didn't say much during his first session. He was relieved she didn't make him talk a lot about his dad. A few weeks later in school, Jeremy was eating lunch by himself when he spotted Elena. The girl came over to Jeremy's table. "I was so sorry to hear that your father died," Elena said softly. "My mom died last year, and I know how hard it is." Jeremy felt a little sick when Elena mentioned his dad, but he also knew she understood what he was going through. "I used to be so scared and confused all the time," Elena said, setting her tray of food down across from Jeremy. "One time my dad took me and my brother to a restaurant we used to go to with my mom. I totally flipped out. I refused to walk into the place." "Yeah, I've done stuff like that too," Jeremy said. "Mostly I tried not to have any feelings at all," Elena continued. "It's like I stuffed them all into a Jack-in-the-Box. Every once in a while, the Jack-in-the-Box would get so full, it would explode and all sorts of feelings would come flying out." "I know what you mean," Jeremy said. "I remember one time after my mom died, when my dad wanted me to clean my room," Elena continued. "I don't know why that made me mad. I slammed my door so hard that a picture fell off the wall. My dad was upset and said, 'Your mother would know what to do.' That just made me madder. But instead of yelling, I started crying. My dad hugged me and started crying too. He said that maybe we needed some help to figure out how not to be so mad and scared all the time. That's when I started going to the counselor." "And did it help you?" Jeremy asked. "Yeah, a lot," said Elena. "I was finally able to talk about my mom and how she died. I used to blame myself. Now I get that I had nothing to do with it. I learned things I could do to help feel better, like pretending I was blowing up a big balloon in my belly. That helped me relax. Yeah, My mom did that trick with me last night at bedtime, Jeremy said. It helped me calm down. Sometimes when I go to sleep, I can't stop thinking of the way my dad died. I used to feel like all the scary stuff that happened was super glued to my good memories. Now they're finally unstuck. Jeremy thought it would be great to think about his dad without feeling so scared. The following week, Jeremy did talk to the counselor about his dad. He saw her several more times and then began to feel better. One day he realized that his stomach didn't hurt anymore. A couple of months later, Jeremy started going to the skate park with Brandon. He even taught his brother how to do his dad's killer kickflip. In school, Jeremy began drawing again. One day he drew a portrait of his dad wearing the funny tie that Jeremy had hand-painted for Father's Day when he was in first grade. When he showed the picture to his mother, he saw that she had tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry if it upsets you, Mom," Jeremy said. "Oh no, honey. I love it," his mother replied, wiping a tear away. "It looks just like Dad. I'm going to frame it and hang it in the living room so we can see it every day." Jeremy and his mom hugged each other. He still felt very sad about his father, but now he was able to smile when he remembered the good times they had together. The counselor suggested that Jeremy and his brother think of a way to honor their father's birthday that summer. The boys decided to have a pizza party and to make one of their father's super-duper pizzas with everything on it. Jeremy invited Elena to the party. Jeremy showed Elena how to toss the pizza dough into the air, just like his father used to. She tried to catch the dough, but it fell onto their toaster, making a big mess. Elena felt bad at first, but Jeremy and his family burst into laughter. "Don't worry, Elena," Jeremy said, still laughing. "The same thing happened to my dad." Jeremy's mom scraped the dough off of the toaster and plopped it in the pizza pan. They all enjoyed a delicious dinner. Jeremy and Brandon decided to have a pizza party every year to remember their dad.
Okay, we are going to do our first poll. So the question is either child suffering from traumatic grief? So 1, Jeremy, 2, Brandon, 3, both, 4, neither. Okay, looks like almost everybody is answering number 1, Jeremy suffering from traumatic grief. Yes. So I think this, I love this resource, this book, because it is such a wonderful illustration of how it's really all about perception. 2 children in the same family, Jeremy and Brandon, both dealing with their father's death, but each of them responding to it in a very different way. So the impact of grief on children is an individual experience and based on perception. And so we really need to try to understand each child's unique experience of loss and death and loss. This book, by the way, is available on YouTube. And so you can rewatch it, you can show it to clients if you think it's appropriate. Obviously, you would have to really think about the appropriateness of showing this to a client. Also can be very helpful to show this to caregivers and then discuss it. So many ways that this can be a really helpful resource. I'm going to skip ahead now. Rather than talking about children's concept of death, I'm going to encourage you to read this slide that will help you. I mean, I think many of you who are here today have been working in the field of children and grief for many years and are very, knowledgeable on the children's concept of death at different ages and stages. If you are newer to this field, then certainly take a look at this slide and read a little bit more on children's ages and stages. So I'm going to just skip ahead. Also, I'm going to skip ahead around magical thinking. but just very briefly say that this is a cognitive process where a child believes that their thoughts, actions, or wishes can influence or even cause the death. I'm also going to skip ahead here on risk factors. So risk factors are the factors that might make it more difficult or complicated for a child to work through their grief, or the grief may have a more sort of, the child might struggle more when these risk factors are at play. So risk factors are things that make it more difficult for the child to deal with a person's death. Okay, I want to now focus on assessment because I think the story of Jeremy's journey really helps us understand how grief, the impact of grief, is a very individual experience. And therefore, in order for us to understand and be helpful, be most helpful to a child who is grieving a death, we need to assess and better understand how that death is impacting the child and the family as a whole. So, some quick guidelines for assessment. We really want to try to gather information from multiple sources and multiple methods. So in addition to meeting with the child and using some child-friendly assessment activities that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, we also want to speak to the child's caregiver. I think it's really important to speak to the child's teacher with consent, of course. Standardized measures could be important or helpful. I also think it's helpful to meet with a child separately from their caregiver when we are assessing, because we know that sometimes children will censor what they say in the presence of their caregivers. Children are often very sensitive to how their caregivers are feeling and don't want to upset their caregivers. And so they may not be able to truly openly talk about what they're really feeling with caregivers in the room. And so when possible, you want to meet with the child separately. Ensure confidentiality is understood at the outset. So explain your duty to report safety concerns. Assessing if the child is a threat of self-harm, and if so, that needs to be stabilized. Differentiate between clarification and correction. What do I mean by that? Well, when you are in the beginning stage and you're trying to understand or assess the impact of grief on the child and the family, you're in the clarification stage. You're trying to understand the child's perception, their thoughts and their feelings. Later, when you shift from assessment to intervention, you're then shifting to sort of correction. So you're in the assessment stage, you're trying to understand if there's any, for example, cognitive distortions, for example, beliefs that the child somehow caused the death. Later in treatment, that's when you're going to try to help the child shift from a feeling of self-blame to understanding that the death was not their fault. So if, for example, during an assessment activity, a child were to say, it's all my fault that my father died because I was always getting into trouble, and that's why he had a heart attack and he died. Well, what you would want to say to that child is, of course, it's not your fault. It's not your fault that your father died. But why would that be clinically unhelpful? Because you're then telling the child how to feel and you're not sort of clarifying. A more appropriate response would be certainly to normalize and validate the child's feelings, but then to try to clarify. So I might say, I've talked with lots of kids who are dealing with the death of a parent, and many tell me like they think it was their fault, that somehow they did something or they were responsible for the death. They made the person die. So that's a really normal feeling that you're experiencing. But there's lots of different reasons why kids might feel like it was their fault. Tell me more about your feelings. So normalize, validate, and then ask an open-ended question to clarify further. Know when to press forward and when to pause. So some children maybe aren't ready to talk about difficult things and might need a more sort of non-directive approach or focusing on things that are maybe not so difficult to talk about. Whereas other times, there might be other circumstances where the child really is ready, and with gentle guidance, we can help them talk about tough stuff. So knowing when to pause and when to press forward. Don't focus on a diagnosis, because I think it's more appropriate to focus on conceptualization. So if the child is acting out, we'll try to understand, well, like, why is the child behaving in this way? And then you want to use your assessment to formulate an appropriate grief support plan. Okay, so take a moment and read through in your handouts the next 2 slides on areas to assess. So I'm going to give you about a minute to read through the next 2 slides on areas to assess, and then I'm going to present some creative assessment activities. Okay, so let's talk about the parent intake session. So if it's a family member who has died, then keep in mind that the parent, the caregiver, is also grieving. And so you need to have a lot of sensitivity to the emotions that they are experiencing as you're trying to gather some information from them. So face-to-face interview is best. Rapport building, so important. So it's all about building rapport and that atmosphere of trust and safety. Balancing task versus process. So you want to gather some information from the caregiver, but you also want to be sensitive and process what the caregiver is sharing with you, and ask the right questions. So ask questions that are going to lead to gathering the information that's going to help you be most helpful to the family. So I'm going to skip ahead because you can read this on your own. These are some questions that you can ask. And this is from my book that's hot off the press, Corey Helps Kids Cope with Grief. Of course, these are not all the questions you'd want to ask. These are just some questions. You want to really kind of think about the family that you're working with and ask yourself, well, what do I need to know in order to be most helpful? Teacher questionnaire. Again, I've included this in your handouts because I think it can be very helpful to speak to the child's teacher, because first of all, often teachers have a very different perspective on how the child is doing. Helpful to gather information from the teacher. And also when you reach out to the teacher to ask some questions about how the child is doing, this provides you with that opportunity to also give some psychoeducation about how teachers can support the child who is grieving. Okay, so before I talk about or present some creative assessment activities to use with the child, I want to talk about rapport building and safety. So establishing and maintaining safety in many ways is the foundation and roots from which all other interventions should build on and anchor to. Physical, emotional, and relational safety are the cornerstones of any positive therapeutic relationship. Without safety, everything else fades into the background and exists on fragile ground. The more regulated, organized, and grounded children are, the more they will learn, develop, engage, and flourish. And this, again, is from Karen Treisman, trauma specialist. So it's really all about creating safety, and there are many different ways that we can create safety, but really it's the use of ourself and what we can do to build rapport and help the child feel safe. I don't have time today to present some creative rapport building activities, but I have included in your handouts some resources that you can go to that have some creative engagement activities, preschoolers all the way up to teens. And of course, many of you have your own favorites, favorite activities that you'd like to use for rapport building. So now I'm going to walk you through step by step my assessment model that I have created with some creative, developmentally appropriate, engaging assessment activities. This first one is called the Red or Black Card Game from Corey Helps Kids Cope with Grief. And it's an activity that helps you to gather significant information about the child's perception of the death and their emotions, their thoughts and emotions. And you can easily modify the questions depending on the child that you're using this with. So this game will help me get to know you better. Pick the top card. So all you need is a deck of cards. Pick the top card. If it's a red card, answer the question. If it's black, pick from the Get Moving grab bag and follow the instructions. Play until all the questions have been answered. So make a happy face, then say something that makes you happy. Make a sad face, then say something that makes you sad. Scared face, then what makes you scared. Angry, what makes you angry. What makes your caregiver, parent, mom, dad, angry? What do they do when they're angry? So these initial questions are, first of all, easing the child into the activity by starting with something more neutral and asking the child to talk about happy feelings, then moving into more difficult feelings, sad, scared, angry, and then some grief-specific questions. So what do you know about when, where, and how the deceased died? Now, obviously, I'm not using the word deceased, so if it's a child who's coming to see you because their father died, you're going to say, what do you know about when, where, and how your father died? This is a really important question to ask because you want to know from the child's perspective what they know about the death. And how do they know it? Did somebody explain? Did they see it? Were they there when it happened? Or if they weren't there, who told them? What did they say? What do they know? What's their perception? We're going to be talking later on about how sometimes, especially in a more complicated kind of a death, children are often not told the truth, and we'll talk more about that later. What are your questions or worries since the person died? What are 2 changes that have happened since the person died? And what helps you when you have a problem or worry? Or sorry, who helps you when you have a problem or worried? How do they help you? So again, this provides you with a real snapshot of some important information about how the death is impacting the child, some of their feelings that they're experiencing, what they know about it, their anxieties, and their supports. And as I said, you can modify the questions. Now, so if they pick a black card, they pick from the Get Moving grab bag. So Meg, I'm going to invite you back on screen, and I'm going to invite everybody to stand up. And so the Get Moving grab bag is, so why do I have the Get Moving grab bag? What is it? First of all, it's a bag filled with short, little, quick, getting up and moving things for us to do. So little actions for us to do. And so kids have a tough time sitting still. And especially if the child is grieving and they're having a lot of overwhelming feelings about the death, it's even harder for them to sit still because they are often kind of just having a really tough time with self-regulation. And so the Get Moving grab bag is a way to intersperse the questions from this assessment activity with just getting up and moving to channel that excessive energy caused by anxious energy into a positive outlet. So Meg, I'm going to pick from my Get Moving grab bag, and we're both going to follow the instructions, and I invite all of you to stand up and follow along. So this one says, march in place 10 times for 10 seconds, and then we're going to take a deep breath. So here we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9.5, 9 3/4, 10. Let's freeze our body and let's take a deep breath. Good. And Meg, so you're already so good at breathing because you've already learned the stop, freeze, breathe technique. So you're already like a superstar at breathing. Way to go. Virtual high five, Meg.
All right. Thanks, Liana.
Lads, and everyone can have a seat. Hopefully you followed along with us. And I've included in your handouts examples from the Get Moving grab bag. And you can have, you can invite the child to add their own ideas to the Get Moving grab bag too. Okay, so I'm going to show you, so Kimura, remember this is the 6-year-old whose father was shot while playing basketball, shot and killed. So I'm going to show you some of her activities as I walk you through my assessment model. So this is her red or black card game. So what makes her happy? Playing. Sad, my dad died. So sometimes kids will say, will kind of initiate direct discussion about the person who's died, and some kids will avoid talking about it. Kimura was kind of right there, and right away, this is kind of in our first session, she is saying my dad died and talking about sad feelings. Make a scared face. Scared that I'll get kidnapped, a robber will come, and I get shooted. So very common for kids who are suffering from traumatic grief. Remember, one of the primary emotions is scared and feeling like there's, other bad things are going to happen. And especially because, her father was shot and killed on the basketball court right beside her apartment building. So of course she's feeling anxious and scared about other bad things happening and about getting shooted too. Make an angry face. So what she's angry about, me. So I'm angry about when kids bully me. So she was getting kids could be so mean. And there were some kids at school who were bullying her and even taunting her about her father's death. And then what makes my mom angry? When I don't listen and she yells at me. What do you know about when, where, and how your father died? Someone shooted him at basketball. What are your questions or worried since the death? Who shooted him? And something bad will happen, that mom will get shooted. So lots of fear and anxiety. The person who had shot her father was not found, not identified. So lots of anxiety in the family about that. What are 2 changes that have happened since the death? We moved to grandma's. I don't like it. She's mean and she yells. And who helps you when you have a problem or worry, and how do they help? You help me with my feelings. Now, while I'm really glad that she sees me as a support and someone who can help her with her families, clearly what we want to see here, what do we want to see here? We want to see her mom on this list. We want to see her grandma on this list, right? We want to see her primary caregivers as supports who can help her when she has a problem or worry. So I'm already, just through this one activity, gathering some really helpful information about the impact of her father's death. Now for teens, I use Google It, and this is an activity developed by Brenda Sousa, someone who many years ago I used to supervise, and she's a wonderful colleague. And she developed this activity called Google It, and I use it with many of my clients, and I also have adapted it. So this is my adapted version of Brenda Sousa's Google It activity, geared to teens. So this activity will help me get to know you better so I can help you. I'm going to ask you some questions, and the way to answer is to search on Google Images. You can type in as many words as needed to find what you're looking for. So we're using social media, Google It, as a way to engage the teen client and assess. So I'm going to give you a moment to read this slide and again, these are some questions that you can ask. You can easily modify this. So I'm going to give you just a quick moment to read this slide, and then we're going to do another chat. So let's use the chat box, and I'd like you to think of another Google It question that you might add to this list. So you are supporting a teen who is grieving a death. What's another question that maybe you would add to this activity. And let's use the chat box. So type in a question that you might add to this assessment activity. Google your favorite sports team. Google somewhere you feel safe. How your family expresses love. A song you enjoy. Something funny. A favorite memory. Something your family enjoys doing when you're one of your favorite activities. It's really hard to read on. We've got like lots of people in here, and it's really hard to read all these things coming in. A favorite poem, a future goal, a favorite TV show, something you love about yourself, something you need. Ooh, I like that. Something you need. That's a good one. Okay, great ideas, everybody. Thank you. So see, you can be creative and add your own creative twists to these activities. Okay, the next assessment activity is how I think, feel, and behave. Again, this is an assessment activity to understand how the impact of death on the child. So the instructions are, this activity will help me understand your thoughts and feelings since the death. Read each statement below and place a sticky dot on the ones that apply to you. If you don't feel that way at all, don't put any dots. If you feel that way a little, put 1 or 2 dots. If you feel that way a lot, put 3 or 4 dots. So as you look at this, I'd like you to think to yourself, what helpful information, what significant information am I gathering through this activity? So this is Kimura's. And as we can see here, she is showing us through this activity, she's experiencing some sleep disturbance, nightmares, scary, intrusive thoughts about the death, some somatic complaints, fears that other bad things are going to happen, anger, lots of angry feelings, family conflict. She's getting into trouble a lot. She put lots of dots on that one. Getting into trouble a lot. People treat me differently since the death. But she's also put lots of dots on, I'm glad I'm getting help now, which is good. So again, you can take this activity, you can adapt it by changing the statements on it, and it gives you so much rich, valuable information without the child having to even say anything. Although, so I wait until the child has finished putting their dots, and then I go back and I ask some open-ended exploratory questions to try to glean additional information. So while this is a great activity for those no-talk kids, those kids who have a tough time verbalizing their thoughts and feelings, and you get so much information without them having to say anything, you still want to ask some open-ended questions to try to get more. So I might, for example, say, I see you put 3 dots beside I have nightmares. Can you describe a nightmare you've had recently? I see you're feeling really angry. You're having a lot of angry feelings. Tell me about some of the things that are making you feel angry. You put 3 dots beside, I'm not getting along well with my family. Tell me more about that. So ask open-ended questions to glean more information. Okay. One more activity, and then we're going to take a break. So people in my world. So this activity will help you talk about the important people in your world. The first step is to fill in the picture of the world by writing the names, and then we'll use stickers. So you want to be fairly directive here in who the child includes. You want them to include themselves, the people that they live with, other significant people, both positive as well as hurtful relationships. I also like the child to include their teacher. So they get a blank picture of the world, and then they fill it in. And then they can use stickers to show how they feel. So this is Kimura's. So she's put herself in the middle. And so happy faces on who's happy. So auntie and uncle, we have fun doing fun things. And Kalia, that's her sister, she tells jokes and laughs. Draw a sad face, who's sad. Me, because my daddy died. My daddy, he died and he can't be with me. Mom, because daddy died. and Kalia because daddy died. B's on who's mad. Mom, she yells at me because I don't listen. Miss Faba, that's her teacher. She yells because I don't do my work. Me, because my daddy died. And grandma, when I don't listen. Spiders on who you feel scared of. So not who feels scared, but who you feel scared of. Miss Faba, that's her teacher. She's mean and she yells at me the most. So that's important for us to know that this child is, not feeling very positive about school and about her relationship with her teacher. That's something we would want to, with family's permission, try to address. Dots on anyone who did something wrong or bad. Me, I don't listen, and I hit Kalia sometimes. Axel, that's a kid in her class. He pushes me and says I am a poopy face. And bears, who takes good care of you. Auntie and grandma babysit me and cook for us. Mom cooks good food. You talk to me and play with me. And Simba, that's her dog, snuggles with me. Now, again, we'd want to see more sort of nurturing stuff coming from mom and grandma. Good that she sees me as a support. But again, this gives us lots of really significant information about her perception of herself and significant people in her life. For teens, this is people in my life. So we're assessing the same, but doing it a little bit differently, geared more to teens, where I'm giving them Post-it notes and some adjectives. And so first they put themselves, people they live with, other significant people, each on a separate Post-it note. They stick the Post-it notes on a large sheet of paper, so give them a large sheet of paper. And then they choose 3 adjectives that best describe each person. So this is Hannah. Her mom died from cancer when she was 10. Her father subsequently remarried, and she's now 15. So this is 5 years later, her father has remarried. And so for herself, she wrote stressed, depressed, artistic. She views dad as loving, stressed, and supportive. Grandmother is loving, kind, lonely. It's her daughter who died. Her stepmother is Julie up on top, and she sees her stepmother as mean, hurtful, and selfish. Her stepsister Jordana as loved, mean, and popular. Her other stepsister as Laura, who is loved, silly, and bad. Her best friend, Karen, is caring, friendly, and understanding. She views me as understanding, helpful, and awesome. I love that, awesome. Teacher, Mr. Spencer, is critical, mean, and unhelpful. Her auntie Lisa is loving, kind, and helpful. And her used to be best friend, so she had a best friend, Nicole, who then dumped her when she sort of became popular with another group of kids. And so she views her old friend as popular, mean, popular, and attractive. So again, this gives you lots of helpful information about how the child, how the death is impacting the child, but lots of helpful information about who is in their life. Okay. We are going to take a break now. And when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about family assessment. So we'll take a 15-minute break. If you can, during your break, if you don't already have, try to gather some paper and some coloring supplies for an activity we're going to do a little bit later. So we'll see you in 15 minutes.